Don't know that in Paris, France, the Eiffel Tower, 1889 it was built. It was supposed to be taken down immediately after the World's Fair. And then they said, we sort of like it. Let's leave it up a little bit longer. And then they said, let's leave it up longer and longer and longer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another edition of I Ask AI. And today, I asked AI how history will actually remember Donald Trump. The answer and the response was pretty amazing. This is how AI thinks history will actually remember Donald Trump.
Disruptive and debated political figures in modern American history. Few leaders of the 21st century altered political discourse, party coalitions, media dynamics, and public attitudes toward institutions as profoundly as Trump. Yet the central historical question would remain unresolved even decades later. Whether he should be remembered primarily as a reformer who exposed weaknesses in the American system and reshaped national politics, or as a destabilizing figure whose methods deepened institutional strain and political division. Unlike many presidents whose historical reputations gradually converged toward a broad consensus, Trump's legacy would likely continue to generate competing interpretations because his influence extended far beyond conventional policy achievements. He transformed not only government, but also the way conservatives concerned about social change and citizens distrustful of political institutions. Historians would likely conclude that Trump did not create these sentiments, but recognized and mobilized them more effectively than his competitors. His victory revealed that many assumptions guiding American politics since the end of the 20th century had become increasingly fragile. Achievements and policy. Legacy. Future historians would assess Trump's accomplishments across several dimensions. Economic policy. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the American economy experienced low unemployment, rising stock markets, and continued economic expansion. Supporters credited Trump's tax reductions, deregulatory initiatives, and business-oriented policies for encouraging investment and economic growth. Historians would likely note that these outcomes resulted from both inherited economic conditions and policy decisions made during his administration. The precise degree of Trump's responsibility would remain debated, but many scholars would acknowledge that economic performance strengthened his political appeal. Tax reform. The passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 represented the most significant tax overhaul in decades. Advocates argued that it stimulated investment and economic activity, while critics contended that it disproportionately benefited corporations and higher-income households. By 2100, historians would probably view the legislation as one of Trump's most substantial domestic policy achievements, regardless of ongoing debates regarding its long-term distributional effects. Judicial appointments. Perhaps Trump's most enduring institutional legacy emerged through the judiciary. His appointment of 3 Supreme Court justices significantly altered the ideological balance of the court. Future historians would likely identify judicial appointments as one of the most consequential aspects of his presidency because their effects extended far beyond his time in office. Numerous legal and constitutional developments throughout the latter half of the 21st century would influence how historians evaluated this aspect of his legacy. Deregulation. Trump pursued broad deregulatory efforts across environmental, energy, financial, and business sectors. Supporters viewed these measures as reducing bureaucratic obstacles and promoting economic efficiency. Critics argued that some regulations existed to address environmental protection, consumer welfare, and public safety. Historical assessments would likely conclude that Trump accelerated a long-standing debate regarding the appropriate balance between government oversight and economic freedom. Foreign policy. Trump challenged many assumptions underlying post-Cold War American foreign policy. His administration encouraged allies to increase defense spending, questioned aspects of long-standing alliances, pursued trade confrontations with rivals and partners alike, and emphasized national sovereignty over multilateral cooperation. Supporters viewed these policies as realistic adaptations to changing global conditions. Critics saw them as disruptive to international stability. Among his most frequently cited foreign policy achievements would be the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states. Historians would likely continue to regard these agreements as a notable diplomatic accomplishment. Controversies and crises. If Trump's achievements ensured his historical significance, his controversies guaranteed that his reputation would remain contested. Impeachments. Trump became the first American president to be impeached twice by the House of Representatives. Future historians would examine these proceedings not merely as constitutional events, but as evidence of the extraordinary level of political conflict characterizing his era. Opinions would differ regarding the merits of each impeachment, yet historians would broadly agree that the episodes reflected unprecedented political polarization. Election disputes. The aftermath of the 2020 election became one of the defining episodes of Trump's career. His refusal to accept the outcome, allegations of electoral irregularities, legal challenges, and continued efforts to contest the result generated intense controversy. Future scholars would view these disputes as pivotal moments in the history of public trust in democratic institutions. January 6th. The January 6th United States Capitol attack would occupy a central place in any assessment of Trump's legacy. Historians would continue debating the extent of Trump's responsibility for the events, but they would almost certainly agree that January 6 represented one of the most consequential constitutional crises of the early 21st century. The event became a symbolic reference point in discussions of democratic resilience, political mobilization, and institutional legitimacy. Legal challenges. Trump's post-presidential years involved numerous investigations, prosecutions, and legal controversies. These proceedings ensured that debates surrounding his conduct continued long after his first presidency ended. By 2100, historians would likely focus less on individual cases and more on what they revealed about the evolving relationship between law, politics, and public perception. Transformation of American political culture. Trump's most lasting influence may have been cultural rather than legislative. He fundamentally altered political communication. His direct, confrontational style broke with many established norms of presidential behavior. Traditional expectations regarding rhetoric, media interaction, and political decorum changed significantly during his rise. Historians would likely identify several enduring consequences. Political parties became increasingly aligned around cultural identity and worldview rather than purely economic interests. Working-class voting patterns shifted substantially, producing a significant realignment within the American electorate. Distrust of institutions, including media organizations, government agencies, universities, and experts, became a central feature of political life. Political discourse grew increasingly personalized and emotionally driven. These developments were not solely caused by Trump, but historians would generally conclude that he accelerated and amplified them. Global impact. Trump's influence extended beyond the United States. His electoral success demonstrated that populist leaders could achieve power within established democratic systems. Political movements across Europe, Latin America, Asia, and elsewhere drew lessons from his campaign methods, communication strategies, and anti-establishment messaging. Trump's trade policies also contributed to broader reconsiderations of globalization. Debates about supply chains, industrial policy, economic sovereignty, and strategic competition intensified during and after his presidency. Historians might ultimately view Trump as one of several leaders who marked the transition from the highly globalized post-Cold War era toward a more competitive and fragmented international order. Media, celebrity, and political branding. Trump's career illustrated the growing convergence of entertainment and politics. Future scholars would likely devote substantial attention to how television, branding, social media, and celebrity culture shaped modern political leadership. Trump's mastery of media attention allowed him to dominate public conversation in ways rarely achieved by previous politicians. His use of social media represented a major turning point. Rather than relying primarily on speeches, press conferences, or traditional interviews, he communicated directly with millions of supporters in real time. Historians may ultimately view Trump as one of the first major political figures whose power depended as much on digital attention as on traditional political organization. Supporters' interpretation. Supporters generally regarded Trump as a transformative figure who challenged entrenched elites and represented ordinary citizens ignored by political institutions. Many believed he strengthened national sovereignty, revitalized economic confidence, secured borders, reshaped the judiciary, challenged bureaucratic power, and resisted ideological trends they opposed. To supporters, Trump's willingness to confront critics demonstrated authenticity rather than recklessness. They viewed his unconventional style as evidence that he was independent of established political interests. Many supporters also believed he exposed weaknesses within media, government, and corporate institutions that might otherwise have remained unchallenged. Critics' interpretation. Critics viewed Trump very differently. They argued that his rhetoric intensified political division, undermined trust in democratic processes, weakened respect for institutional norms, and contributed to an increasingly confrontational political environment. Many critics considered his response to electoral defeat particularly damaging because they believed it encouraged skepticism toward democratic outcomes. Others argued that his leadership style prioritized personal loyalty over institutional stability and contributed to the erosion of long-standing democratic conventions. From this perspective, Trump's significance derived not from policy achievements, but from the precedents established during his political career. Which predictions proved correct? From the perspective of 2100, historians would likely conclude that both supporters and critics were partly right and partly wrong. Supporters were likely correct that Trump permanently reshaped American politics, transformed the Republican coalition, and altered debates surrounding trade, immigration, and foreign policy. Critics were likely correct that his presidency accelerated political polarization and intensified disputes over democratic norms. Supporters who predicted national collapse if Trump lost office would likely be judged mistaken. Critics who predicted the immediate collapse of American democracy under Trump would likewise be judged mistaken if democratic institutions ultimately endured. The most accurate forecasts would probably be those recognizing that Trump represented neither a temporary anomaly nor an existential endpoint, but a catalyst accelerating deeper structural trends already underway. Historical comparisons. Historians would frequently compare Trump with several earlier American figures. Like Andrew Jackson, Trump appealed to voters who felt excluded from elite political circles and challenged established institutions. Like Franklin D. Roosevelt, he reshaped political coalitions and altered expectations about presidential leadership, though toward very different ideological ends. Like Ronald Reagan, he transformed his party's identity and communicated effectively with broad segments of the electorate. Like Richard Nixon, his achievements became inseparable from controversies concerning political norms and public trust. Like Barack Obama, he symbolized broader societal changes extending beyond policy debates alone. Yet historians might ultimately conclude that no single comparison fully captures Trump's uniqueness. Reputation over time. Historical reputations often evolve as immediate passions fade. During the decades following Trump's political career, assessments would likely fluctuate according to subsequent developments. Economic performance, judicial decisions, international events, and the trajectory of American democracy would all influence interpretations of his presidency. If institutions remained resilient and adapted successfully, historians might view Trump as a disruptive but ultimately constructive reformer who forced overdue adjustments. If political fragmentation worsened significantly, scholars might assign greater weight to the destabilizing aspects of his leadership. Consequently, Trump's reputation would remain unusually dependent on events that occurred after he left office. Possible historical verdicts. By 2100, several plausible interpretations could coexist. A highly favorable interpretation would portray Trump as a transformative leader who recognized emerging social and economic realities before much of the political establishment, reshaped government institutions, strengthened national sovereignty, and accelerated necessary reforms. A moderately favorable interpretation would acknowledge substantial achievements while criticizing aspects of his rhetoric and leadership style, placing him among important but imperfect presidents. A mixed interpretation, perhaps the most likely, would depict Trump as a figure of extraordinary consequence, whose accomplishments and controversies were inseparable. In this view, he would be remembered neither as a national savior nor a national villain, but as a catalyst who accelerated profound changes already underway. A highly critical interpretation would emphasize institutional strain, democratic controversies, and political polarization, portraying Trump as a leader whose methods imposed long-term costs on American governance despite notable achievements. Ultimately, historians of 2100 would probably agree on one point, even if they disagreed on nearly everything else. Donald Trump was among the most historically significant political figures of the 21st century. Whether judged positively, negatively, or somewhere in between, his influence on American politics, political culture, media, and international affairs would remain impossible to ignore. His legacy would endure not because it was universally admired or condemned, but because it fundamentally altered the course of modern political history.